Welcome everybody. Hopefully you can hear this. I'll try to speak loudly. There's a bit of wind up here on the knoll today. What we're going to be looking at is a Aboriginal Sill Creek quarry. We're actually on the campus of University of New England. You can see there's the university back that direction with the coal-fired power plant, now defunct, on the edge of the hill there. And as I pan all the way around, you can see the pine trees on this hill over this way. That's actually the original location where Bulamimba was going to go, but they decided to build it further down the hill, but that's why all those pine trees are there. Panning around. Sorry about the sound quality, not a lot I can do about the wind. Okay, so as an archaeologist who's interested in Aboriginal archaeology, try to imagine this vista without any of the houses, the buildings, the paddocks. Think about the open eucalypt forests that would have been here, and think about where Aboriginal people would have lived in this landscape and how they would have mapped onto it symbolically. I don't know how well it turns up on the film, but you can see a flat-topped hill there in the distance out towards, it's on the road that you take out towards Dangar's Falls. We call that Arthur's Seat in the present day, but that would have been a dreaming locality. Most of these hills that you can see around here, perhaps even the one we're standing on now, they all would have had Aboriginal names, and they would all have been incorporated into the symbolic landscape of this area, tied in with the storylines and the dreaming stories. It would have been very rich in cultural knowledge, this particular landscape that you can see that we're on here. Now, one reason I brought the students up here today is to talk about this specific landform that we're on. You can kind of see it's got a flat top. It's actually quite a prominent knoll that you can see from the road as you drive around the university and from the various roads around the place. It sticks out pretty good. We just chased about 400 sheep off of it as we were coming up. They like to come up here and eat the grass that's up on top of this knoll. But Aboriginal people have been visiting this knoll for potentially thousands of years. We don't know the dates on this particular site, but it's because it's a source of stone for making stone tools. Now, the type of stone that outcrops here is called silcrete, all right? And there's geologists tell us two different scenarios for the silcrete in the Armidale region, how it was formed geologically. One of those scenarios is that back millions of years ago, across this entire landscape, there were volcanoes and lava flows, okay? And the lava flows covered this whole landscape and produced things like Arthur's Seat and the stone that you can see outcropping here on this knoll. It's called basalt, all right? So it's ancient lava flow. One idea of the formation of the silcrete is that it formed under the basalt, where silica leached through out of the basalt and accumulated in the soils that were underneath those basalt flows and created this silica-rich stone that was really good for fracturing and making sharp-edged tools. Okay, that's one idea of how silcrete in this area formed. Another idea that's specific to this locality and perhaps others around here is that it was formed through contact metamorphism. And what that means is this molten lava came out across the landscape and it cooked the stone that was underneath that the lava flowed out on top of, and caused it to become silicified and created this really glassy stone in that way. So geologists tell me that's probably the explanation for the stone that we're about to see. Now we'll walk over this way. And you can actually see where this was happening in this area. This is basalt, and in the middle of this chunky, flowy basalt, we have this stuff. Look at that. Sweet. That is beautiful stone for making stone tools, all right? You can see it's extremely fine-grained. I would get down there and lick it, but I don't know. Maybe not today. It's beautiful. It's beautiful stone for making tools. And Aboriginal people, of course, mapped on to all of the resources in their landscape, and of course they would have known about this stone soon after they colonized this part of the country, somebody would have discovered this. And we see little signs all over this knoll where Aboriginal people were coming and trying to get at this stone, trying to get at the stone to make tools. What's interesting about this outcrop is the stone is very variable in quality. This is crap. This is the basalt stuff. Get this really high quality pocket here in the middle. Have a look at this one. That's not very good. You got this high quality stuff here on the edge, and all along this particular edge here, Aboriginal people have been hitting that with a hammerstone, trying to get pieces to break off. How can I tell? Well, take Stone Tools unit, ARPA 352, is that right? And you will learn everything about how stone tools are made and how to recognize them. But I can tell from the fracture, the sort of the signs of bashing on this ridge, that they were trying to get flakes to come off of this stone. All right, so what we'll do now is I'll just walk around this particular quarry to a number of spots and talk about what we can see there in terms of how Aboriginal people were trying to get at the stone. One thing about making stone tools is you have to hit on the edge of a stone to get a flake to come off, okay? You hit it here and the flake breaks off like that. When you've got a situation like this with a really high quality stone right there in the middle, there's no edge to hit on, okay? And that's probably one reason why there isn't a lot of signs that this particular piece has been exploited. These little features here are called pot lids, all right? You can see there's incipient ones there. Those are all pot lids. That's from fire. Now there's a possibility that somebody actually set a fire there to try to get the stone to fracture that way. We know that Aboriginal people did that in the historic period. It's hard to say because you can also get the same sort of pot lidding if there was a bushfire that went across this area in the remote past. But so it's the bashing in particular that we're interested in looking at. So a lot of bashing on that boulder. All right, you can see there's more of the silkrete all along here. If you guys, you guys have any questions or queries, just shout them out. I'm just going to walk along this particular contour. You can see here's a piece here where people have hit it here. You can see there's crushing along that edge, and they got a few little pieces to come off there. Not real successful. You can see how the stone is probably higher quality up there, and it gets a bit coarse down into this area. They're slamming on that with hammerstones, trying to get pieces to come off. Okay, let's keep going around. Got a number of pieces here. All right, let's look at this one first. Got a piece here. You can see they've been hitting it along this edge. It's pretty big, I'm not going to move it. But there's an edge here that has bashing from both directions along it. Here's a nice piece here. And they were trying to get pieces off of this edge. When you see angular pieces like this, it's a pretty good sign. Somebody hit it right there. Hopefully I'm not cutting you out on the camera. But they hit it right there, and they got a few pieces to come off, nothing really big. A few little shatter bits coming off, but you can see how that's been tweaked up out of the ground. Somebody's pushed it up out of the ground to try to get a better angle on fracturing it. Here's another good example that I particularly like this one because they tried really hard on this one to get lots of pieces to come off. All right, you can see most of these edges have some sort of bashing or battering. That's what we call a Hertzian cone, where it was struck right there. It embedded a cone into the surface of the stone, but a flake didn't come off in that case. Lots of bashing all along here. Okay, we roll it over. There's bashing all along this edge from both directions. This edge, this edge. There's even bashing along here, coming in that way. What I suspect we're actually looking at here is what we call a hammerstone. I think what Aboriginal people were doing, were picking up this piece, smashing it down on some of these larger boulders to try to get pieces to come off. Some of those larger facets that we can see on those boulders might have been pieces that were knocked off with a stone like this. You know, this is pretty heavy. I mean, it takes a bit of grunt to pick the thing up. So they were probably throwing this one down onto some of these boulders to get pieces to break off. All right, so put that one back in there. And we've got some smaller pieces here as well. We'll pull that one out. Here's another one. But all of these have evidence for bashing on them. Again, not real super high quality material. I'd say this quarry was probably visited occasionally over thousands of years. It may not, the stone quality up here isn't that outrageous, so I suspect that it wasn't something that people were coming to on an annual basis or anything like that, probably sporadic visits. This quarry has puzzled me in the past because this is a beautiful hammerstone. The bashing that's right on this end, that came from a lot of stoneworking, probably trying to knock off large flakes. What's interesting about this quarry is we have a lot of these big things, these big hammerstones and chunks like this, but we don't have a lot of the flakes themselves visible. And I have an explanation for that we'll get to in a minute. Some parts of Australia, you'll go out onto a quarry like this and it'll absolutely be covered in carpets of stone flakes, modified stone flakes, broken flakes, in their hundreds of millions on some of these quarry sites. This one isn't that dense, but there's evidence for really heavy, intensive working going on here. And this is a good example of it, this large hammerstone with really heavy hammerstone wear. That would probably have taken several hours to get that worn, several hours of working, okay? This one's interesting too because you got a good flake scar here. This was struck here, so the flake that came off was the size of the palm of somebody's hand. And you can see another flake scar here. That one probably not quite so good. But so they were also getting a few flakes off of this, perhaps before it was used as a hammerstone. All right? So let's put that little fella back. Keep going on around. See, there's some flake scars on this one. Flake scar there, there. I've dropped over the edge of the hill. See, there's still some sizable boulders down in this area. This one has a little pocket of that super high quality stone in this less desirable material out here. You can see somebody was going just after that pocket. They're trying to get pieces to come off, but they didn't have a real good angle to get nice chunks to come off, so it's kind of shattered and didn't have a lot of success there. But that's evidence for someone bashing away here, trying to get some of that stone out. Looks like it might be another flake scar there. Big boulder, let's see. There's another couple down here by this tree we'll go see. Oh, now this is a flake, okay? Somebody struck it up here. It's not a real good one. The platform's gone. They hit it here and it shattered, and a piece came off there, but this piece was knocked off the parent boulder. Now, that's one of the questions I often get. Well, what were people making here? It looks to me, from based on some of the material I've seen, a lot of the debris, is that they're trying to make big pieces, big flakes, about the size of your hand, and then sometimes they'll trim away the parts of that stone that aren't very good, or they'll just make it a bit smaller, a bit lighter weight to carry, and then that's what they would take with them across the landscape, okay? So as they moved across the landscape and needed sharp tools for various tasks, they could just pull this out of their dilly bag, knock off a smaller flake, use that flake for whatever they needed, throw it away, plus the edge of the larger flake could be used for a number of tasks as well. So, as an archaeologist, that's really interesting because we've got the stone source here. We know this particular type of stone came from this knoll. So if we can find where this stone occurs on campsites, along, say, the creek basin, or further out that way, we can start reconstructing the movement of people across the landscape. So that's a good one. And then some of these boulders have more evidence of working on them. This one, it's a bit obscured by the lichen, but this whole ridge, somebody's bashed on it trying to get pieces to come off. You can see flake scars all along that ridge, well, the whole length of it. Look at the size of that boulder too. They're probably doing it while it was sitting in the ground, much like it is now. And then another one here at the base of this tree. You can see some good, this was the surface here, and they're striking against it, and you can see the flake scars coming off this way, all right, along there. And there's other flake scars on this boulder as well. So back to that question of where is everything? Where are all the flakes? I showed you one, but mainly what we've seen is hammerstones and gigantic cores on boulders. Where's everything else? Well, we used to back in the day, occasionally we would bring students out here as part of field methods, because this entire surface of these slopes around the entire perimeter of this knoll is covered with stone artifacts, okay? But it's also covered in grass. So that is one of the problems with doing archaeology in these sort of settings, is you just can't see it. The reason that we know this quarry is here is because half the cores are the size of boulders, and we've got these giant hammerstones the size of your head. Those are sticking up out of the grass, but all the flakes, all the shatter, all that stuff. We actually, when the grass was dead one year in a drought, I think they recorded like 600 or 800 flakes just in this area alone that had been exposed in the dusty soil. So the artifacts are actually here. You just can't see them because they're covered in grass. Another interesting factor for this site as well is this entire area was once plowed when Bulamimba was which is where those pine trees are through there. You can actually see that post pole on top of Bulamimba through the trees. This area was plowed up, and they had some sort of crop in here back in the 1800s when this was an operating property. And so that's disturbed a lot of the artifacts and artifact distribution down on the slopes of this knoll. And you can actually pick it out on aerial photographs, the boundaries of the plowed area. Another thing that farmers tend to do is when they're plowing an area, if they have big rocks, they'll just carry them over to the creek and dump them in. So if you follow that creek that you can see, the little channel, occasionally you'll see piles of rocks that have been pulled out of this paddock and dumped into the creek. And a lot of those rocks are actually cores and artifacts that were part of this quarry, and they were pulled and dropped into the creek so it wouldn't damage the plow. Alright, so let's walk around this way because I've got another observation I want to make. Okay, this pit that you can see here was dug by the soil scientists on campus, and we've told them I don't know how many times not to dig your pits up here because this is a heritage site and it's protected and it's illegal. but they just don't seem to get the message, or they don't care, one or the other. So they're digging this hole to teach students on the soil types here, but they're digging it into a heritage site. Not the best thing. But the reason I brought you all over here is this type of soil is typical of what forms on basalt. It's like a clay soil, that we call it a cracking clay soil, because during the dry season, pretty big cracks can open up in the surface of the ground, and then when it gets damp, they seal back up again, new cracks open later, and of course, artifacts in that sort of context can be worked down the soil column well over a meter in many cases. It depends on how far down you have to go before you start getting into the regolith and bedrock. That's what stops the stone artifacts. So, another reason why I don't think we see a ton of artifacts on this surface is because they've sunk. They've actually sunk into the soil profile. And my prediction would be that if we were to do an excavation here, we would probably find stone artifacts down to a meter or more in depth in these deposits. All right? So that's another explanation for why we've got all these signs of heavy working up on top of the knoll, but not a great deal in the way of flakes and stone artifacts visible on the surface. So we have that combination of poor visibility on the surface, and then this factor where artifacts are probably sinking down the soil column. All right, but my prediction is that there would be quite a lot of stone tools buried below the surface here. All right. Now, another interesting aspect about this quarry is a lot of the artifacts that have been found here, particularly on the slope in this area and back in this flat, are not from here. They're made from stone that does not occur on this knoll. And that's kind of interesting. One possible explanation for that is that people coming from other parts of the landscape, there's a lot of siltcrete that outcrops back this direction, different type from the stuff that outcrops here. They're bringing tools with them. They would always have some stone tools in their toolkits. They'd say, oh, let's go up and get some new stuff up on the knoll. They would have had a name for this. So they come up here, they make new tools, get new fresh stone for their tools, big stuff. They throw away their old ones. And so those old ones that are made from stone elsewhere on the landscape, we find here at the quarries. So you wouldn't think it. You'd think you'd only be finding stone tools here that were fresh, pristine, unused, you know, the stuff that they left behind for one reason or another. You do get that, but you also tend to get a lot of stone artifacts that are used up from stone sources that don't occur here. Again, this is another part of the picture. We can use evidence like that to try to reconstruct how people were using the landscape, moving around between stone sources, discarding tools. It's all part of the story, okay? Let me just, there used to be some really cool artifacts in this area. I haven't been up here for well over a year, and it looks like some of these trenches might be new, so they might have disturbed them. Here's a core. Okay, pretty typical that you see on archaeological sites in Australia. You can see there's been flakes struck off this way. There's also along this edge been flakes struck off this way. This one happens to still be on the surface, but you can see where they were trying to get pieces to come off. And then the back end of this core, again, has been used as a hammerstone. All right? So again, signs that people were spending a lot of time here making a lot of stone tools, but not a lot on the surface for those various factors that I've talked about. Somewhere in this area, there's two of the most spectacular hammerstones I think I've seen on Australian sites. They're almost perfect spheres, all right? They're about the size of a grapefruit, and they're almost perfectly round. And to get a hammerstone to wear like that is really interesting. It takes tons of time to create that kind of wear, and you also have to constantly be rotating so that if you can picture it, the attrition that happens when you use it wears off all the sharp edges until you get that sphere. So there had to have been a deliberate design in the way they were rotating their hammerstone as they were using it to get that shape. This might be, you know, maybe that if this had been used long enough, maybe this one would have developed that morphology as well. Who knows? Okay, so I won't try to look for that now because I'm cognizant of keeping the file size fairly small on this video. But you can see some of these stones. Ah, here's one of them. This one. Pull it out of the ground. Look at that. Is that cool or what?
Very cool.
Like I said, about the size of a grapefruit. Perfectly spherical. Now I have seen, maybe the light's better if I face this way. I have seen spherical hammerstones like this in the literature on sites from the Neolithic and early Middle Ages in Europe. And it's kind of interesting why people would go to such effort to make sure their hammerstones wear to the spherical shape in such widely different parts of the world, converging on a similar idea of how a hammerstone should look. I absolutely love that hammerstone. This one caused a bit of controversy back about, oh, it's probably been 10 years ago now, when someone had collected it, ostensibly for safekeeping, and the local elders found out about it and made him return it. It was on the front page of the Armadale paper. And that's generally true. Well, that is, I think, universally true. The traditional owners, if you do find an artifact out on the landscape, you always leave it, put it right back where you found it. Okay, you can look at stuff, admire it, take photographs, but always leave it where you find it. And I've been coming back to this particular artifact for over a decade to show students. And of course, it could have been here for many thousands of years before that. So we'll put it back in there, right where it belongs. And one more thing, and then I'll switch off the camera. That's one reason I get worried about these guys digging holes around here, is that, you know, they don't know that that would be a hammerstone, and they Glass Poor Yorick. That's for the zooarchaeology students. It's a sheep. This chunk of basalt. Freezing for those of you who are in warmer climes. Bit of a wind chill here. It's probably what, 10 degrees, 12? It's a wind chill, a lot colder than that.
About 12.
Okay, we've got a big boulder here. All right. Now this boulder is not real good quality stone, but somebody wanted a piece of it anyway. So they took a huge hammerstone, possibly the size of one of those that we saw earlier, and they hit it here to break off this chunk. All right, and it's possible that that chunk was what they then took away with them. But what's interesting about this boulder is if we come around this side, we can also see that there's a massive flake scar here. Now this flake scar had to have been struck against this surface to get this piece to pop off. All right, I suspect this is a flake scar here, possibly others around there, all struck from the other side of this boulder. All right. Now the reason I find that interesting is that whoever was messing around with this boulder had to flip the bloody thing over. How much do you think that would weigh? It would weigh a lot of kilos, I can tell you that. So what I might suggest is that maybe this wasn't just individuals coming up here and getting this stone. Maybe it was groups of people, and they were working together to try to get chunks of stone to come off, because I think that'd be probably a two-person job to roll that over. Maybe not. Maybe if you were pretty handy with levers and stuff, you could roll that over yourself. But in any case, I find that interesting. We've got this massive boulder that's been worked on both faces, so it had to have been rolled over at some point during that process. And so that's showing you also that the amount of labor that was being spent in trying to get stone from this particular knoll. Now, another interesting thing about this stone is, aside from that first patch I showed you, most of this stuff really doesn't scream that it's really high quality. It's actually fairly coarse, but the hammerstones, the number of cores, these boulders where people were trying to get stuff off pretty desperately, even though the material might not have been that high quality, you know, what's going on there? I can say with confidence that there's much higher quality silcrete that occurs, you know, 4 or 5 kilometers that direction out towards the tip. And even just about 1.5 kilometers from here that direction, there's a fairly decent outcrop of silcrete back behind those buildings that is higher quality than this. So why all the effort here? Why the hours that were spent breaking up this stone that created that much wear on those hammerstones? It's possible when we see things like this that are a little bit difficult to explain, that maybe this had an important spot in the storylines, and this particular stone was particularly important, not so much for the quality of it, but from where it came in the landscape and the associations with the stories that permeated this landscape. We'll never know, but it's something interesting to think about in terms of the narrative of the Aboriginal archaeology of the New England tablelands, and in particular of our own little quarry site here on the University of New England campus. All right, so I think I'll leave it there, and yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope the sound quality wasn't too terribly bad, and yeah, I'll see you on Moodle.